Generally, I have not been doing stunts here, but, you know. And this used a filter. You know, the water around this table, you know, was Flint water that was filtered. And it just confirms what we know scientifically, which is that if you're using a filter, if you're installing it, then Flint water at this point is drinkable.
The gold standard of water.
Yes.
Yes. The president obviously visiting Flint, Michigan today to see things for himself. Now, 3 officials, though, in Michigan facing criminal charges over the tainted water crisis. And now several places in our own region are trying to avoid becoming the next Flint. And they're not just being overly protective. This week, NEWBURGH declared a state of emergency. That after a containment was found in the drinking water. Governor CHRISTIE in New Jersey is having the water in every school tested for lead. That after many schools in Newark were found to have high levels in their water. And yesterday we spoke about the policy of it, and today I want to discuss the legal ramifications. And Doug, you've been involved in a lot of class action suits. Explain where there's the most exposure in this kind of thing, and what you've said before is this isn't something that can just be answered today. This may take a long time to see the long-term effects.
So you can identify the people that have been exposed to lead by taking a simple blood test. You see elevated levels of lead in their blood. But when it comes to the effects of it, there's something called the latency period, meaning the period of time between exposure to the time of the onset of the disease or the symptoms or whatever. With lead, the lawsuits are alleging like skin lesions, you know, people being depressed, things like that. But lead is traditionally associated with diminished IQ, learning disabilities, and that could take years. And that's the subject of intense litigation also, because you're looking at the family, you're looking at, you know, the types of exposures. So the lawsuits that are being put in place now could be addressing the symptoms they have today, you know, skin rashes and everything, if that bears out in the medicine. They could also be looking at medical monitoring to look at the population of people and say, over a period of time, are these people having these effects? And then the lawsuits could kick in. So there's a lot of things that have to need to play out.
Don't they have settlement funds that they get the money now and distribute it later after the injuries manifest?
Well, you could do that, but the problem is if you get somebody who's, you know, 2 people, one who's affected severely and the other one who's not, how do you figure out how much money to give them now?
Now, Doug, in terms of who the suits are brought against and how it's different, there's an asbestos case. Traditionally, you're talking about a corporation that may have been negligent with their staff. But in this particular case, the public had put faith, as they should have, in state and city officials to make sure that the water they're drinking won't make them sick, let alone worse. How does it work in terms of exposure liability when you're a state or a city entity? Is it harder to prove it against them? Is it easier because you already know they got the funds? How does it work?
Well, there could be certain hoops that you have to jump through, notices of claim. You have to, you know, put the state on or the city on notice that you're going to bring lawsuits. But traditionally, you can still bring a lawsuit against a city or state. I mean, that's something you can do. And there's laws that are often protective of the city or state, where the corporation may not have the same protections, but it can be done.
Aren't they going to have immunity, so you have to allege that in order to get around the immunity that they're committing tortious acts outside the scope of their...
Right, there's sometimes they look more towards intentional conduct, things like that, or gross negligence as opposed to lower standard.
And that would get rid of the state or municipal immunity?
Yeah, well, it could. It could. With the water, there's a caveat with this particular case where if you're paying for the service, then you actually, because you're paying for it, then you can be involved. But there's ways of getting around it.
And then there's a power, an authority that's separate from the city and the state, right? That may not enjoy the same immunity, some sort of quasi-agency?
Well, we have those, like we have the Port Authority, and we have these quasi-agencies exist all the time. But the status of the agency has to be, you know, that's
determined.
Something right.
You know, Mayor, you have 3 officials here. They're not being civilly charged. They're being criminally charged. I don't remember that as much, okay? And this is in graft or whatever else. This is beyond dereliction of duty. These people consciously, and there's email threads to prove it, they were alerted to the issue. they first minimized the issue, then they consciously chose what they believed to be a more cost-efficient way, even though they were told that there was risks attendant for those that were drinking, and never brought it to anyone's attention. And even when they raised the thing, they tried to mitigate and pretend it never happened. Where is the greatest exposure for officials, and where do you think long-term the legacy of FLINT will be in terms of holding officials here culpable?
I think that you're going to be looking at possibly multiple charges of offering false instruments for filing. In New York State, that would be a Class E felony. You'd be looking at up to 4 years per count. It could be happening each and every day. You'll be looking at possibly situations that could involve criminally negligent homicide, possibly manslaughter if you can show that somebody actually died as a result of their conduct. And you'll also be looking at reckless endangerment. And to Doug's point, you have lots of people who are going to have additional hurdles now because they're going to have to prove that their lead exposure came from FLINT, that they were there when they got the majority of it, that it didn't happen somewhere else. You're going to have notices of claim, which are going to be filed.
Kind of has some of the hallmarks of the folks that were at ground zero and how long it took for those effects.
Absolutely, but if you look at Dean Skelos and you look at Sheldon Silver and you look at 12 years, these cases should certainly get more than 12 years if you're talking about criminal liability based upon conduct.
One of the things, Brad, today I was covering some stories about fire departments that were shuttering. There was a budgetary decision. They didn't have the money, so that they were going to rely on volunteer fire departments. Police departments we've seen in our region have shuttered as well. Could we see an incident where people don't get to the fire in time, or people don't respond to a call, and they say, wait a minute, you made a budgetary decision that consciously imperiled my safety one way or the other. Your budgetary decisions put my family at harm here. Could there be a new threshold here to holding officials criminally responsible, even if they'll argue I'm just making budgetary priority decisions?
Well, look, these decisions are always made in the arguments that police won't be there, fire, emergency people won't be there in time. So that's always made. I think if you took an extreme example, like you only had one police station and everyone turned out of downtown Manhattan, and up in Harlem you had a problem and somebody died, I think that would be something that would be criminally negligent potentially for government. But I think
it all comes down to money. And I can just tell you from budgetary standpoints, governors, mayors, they're all wrestling here with shortfalls. And the one thing FLINT at least said to me was, by them saving a few bucks, look at everything that's opened up here. I wonder if it'll have applications beyond this. All right, coming up next. This video could have cost a football player millions of dollars, potentially even 10 million bucks. This released on draft day after somebody hacked into a social media account and he fell several draft spots as it came out. The question is, does he have any legal recourse? That is The Table Laughs.